Greetings. I'm going to talk about assessment in a mathematics classroom. And that is a broad, deep subject. It goes beyond the idea of formative and summative assessments, which are just very generic, broad terms about when we are going to do an assessment. So are we assessing what students are doing and how they're interacting with the mathematics that's being presented, and have they retained an understanding, and are they able to apply it somewhere else at a later time? So that's really the two ideas there. But more involved is what are you going to test? When are you going to test it? How are you going to test that information and their knowledge and ability to use that information? I noticed with the textbook that I was using in an Algebra 1 class, which of course is a modern textbook, it's very new, that students were struggling with a certain concept. And so I looked in my personal library, pulled out an algebra book that was literally 100 years old. It may not have been this particular one, but this is in the right frame. So these can be resources too. Looking at different textbooks from different time periods can allow you to look at different ways that materials were presented and different expectations that were had at that time period. And so I pulled a example and a way of doing a problem out of that 100-year-old textbook, put together a lesson with that material and presented it as a supplement to what the current textbook was. And then at a later time, parts of that became part of a question on a quiz or a test. And so I've pulled in more resources. I've taken it from a lesson into being represented as a question on a summative assessment. So from the formative perspective, I was seeing struggling students, and I carried that from working to represent the material into testing the material and using a part of that secondary supplemented lesson carried into that summative assessment. Another thing to look at is careful consideration before you even begin to do your lesson. So I recently finished reading this book. It's Lesson Study. It is a Japanese approach to improving mathematics, teaching, and learning. And so this is a look at what Japanese schools do in a very deep study of using school goals along with subject goals brought together with very reflective ideas as a team about how a subject is going to be presented, a topic is going to be presented, what's going to go into that presentation. This goes really deep into thinking about, if I'm going to use a manipulative, what manipulative am I going to use and why am I using that particular manipulative, and does that manipulative cause the concept or idea that I'm trying to teach to be reinforced in the student's mind? Can the student understand from the manipulative what I'm trying to teach, and can the teacher look at what the student has done with the manipulative and determine, is the student getting the concept that I'm trying to get across in the way that I'm trying to get it across? And so just the manipulative itself could be a way to have some formative assessment of a lesson. And then finally, I want to point out a volume of knowledge here. This is the Assessing Mathematics Proficiency from the Mathematical Sciences Research Institute. And so you can see that this is a pretty thick book. There is a lot of good information presented in this text. And so I'm currently trying to work through some of this material. It's got some great ideas in it. Gives discussion about what's going on in the mathematics classroom in the United States. Gives you some ideas of how that is a little bit different maybe than outside the United States, and can highlight what's lacking, possibly what we need to be looking at for the future. And so there's just so much information in here. It also has some student sample work, and just lots of different ideas are presented in this book. And so it's a nice research for looking at assessing mathematical proficiency, exactly what the title says. And so we need to be mindful of, in the topic of mathematics, there are different things that we are looking for, and sometimes the standards don't really speak to what is needed to be tested in the mathematics classroom. And sometimes that's difficult to get those standards in the way that we really want them to convey the things that we want in a mathematics classroom. And so teachers really have to be understanding of their subject, some of the education theory, some of the research, and kind of bring this all together in an amalgamation that is effective for helping the student get to where the student needs to be, and helping the teacher accomplish the goals that are set at whatever levels those goals have been set, whether it's at the school level, the state level, a national level, or a college focused level, a career focused level. There's a lot of things that a teacher has to be mindful of to manage as they put together lessons, as they look at assessing how those lessons are being received by the student, and then assessing the comprehension and retention by those students. So a lot goes into this, and we need to make sure that we are mindful of it, that we continue to work ourselves to be aware of all of these avenues. It's a difficult job, and we've been entrusted with that as mathematics teachers. We need to be mindful of the calling that is placed on our lives. Stay well, stay safe, trust God. Have a great afternoon.